Azul. Hello, everybody. Azul is hello in Tamazight, so everybody can say it with me. Azul. Great. My name is Lucy McNair, and I'm a professor in the English department here at LaGuardia Community College at the City University of New York. And I'm co-curator of this wonderful film festival that we've been doing for the past 8 years. We are super, super thrilled that you are actually sitting in seats here in the theater at LaGuardia. Yay! Because we're returning to in-person viewings. We also are continuing with our virtual edition, which is going to happen on May 2nd. There's going to be films to view on the LaGuardia Performing Arts Center website that you can view, and then we'll have a fascinating discussion on May 2nd at 9:30, so you can also do that. Today, I just want to say a little bit about the Amazigh, because maybe some people are not familiar with that name. The Amazigh people are the indigenous people of North Africa and Northwest Africa. They have lived there forever, since about, 10,000 years. So similar to indigenous people in the United States or in Canada or in South America, in Australia, in many places of the world, they have a long tradition of oral storytelling. And since the 2000s, they've begun to transpose those stories into film. So after a long period of being oppressed in many ways, their language was not officially recognized in the countries where they live or actively suppressed. They've really started to just represent themselves in film. So today we're going to see 2 shorts that we're going to talk about, and I'm really excited because we have a guest speaker who's going to join us. And just to wrap that up, so when I say North Africa, I mean from the Canary Islands, which is part of Spain in the Atlantic, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and then south of the Sahara, Mauritania, Mali, and Niger. So it's a really large space where there's many different ethnicities, but who all in some way draw their strength and their memory from this common identity, the Imazighen or the Amazigh people. So I want to introduce the films today. We're going to see 2 shorts. They're very different, but both of them are surprising. They fall within our theme of facing the unexpected. I'm going to first introduce our guest speaker, because she's going to talk about the first film. So I want to call Ellen Hernandez up. She is an English professor at Camden County College and a writer and development associate for the High Atlas Foundation. She's been an educator for about 40 years and a college English teacher for over 30 years. She's also a writer, and she's published 2 textbooks, a chapter of an essay collection and poetry collections. I actually saw a poetry collection of hers when I was in Morocco recently, which was really fantastic. And she's been writing for this foundation called the High Atlas Foundation, which she's going to talk to you about. So I'd like everybody to give a warm welcome to Ellen Hernandez.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here today, and I'm so glad that you're going to get to see this film. It is a short film, that's true, but it has a lot going on in it, and afterwards I'll be happy to answer questions about it and talk to you about what you find and what you see. I can tell you that I am, as Professor McNair said earlier this morning, I'm American. I am not of Moroccan descent, nor am I of Amazigh descent. However, I have found that I've developed a connection with the people of North Africa and have many Moroccan friends who are Amazigh or Arab or mixed or other, as you will find in Morocco because of its geographic placement. And the first time I went to Morocco, I went as a tourist. The second time, I went as a student. And now, when I return, I go back there as a kind of a quasi-Moroccan, I guess I would say. And my Arabic is progressing, although sometimes when I say ana maghribi, feel qalbi, I'm not pronouncing it correctly, so instead of saying I'm Moroccan in my heart, I'm saying I am Moroccan in my dog, because kalb and qalb sound a lot alike. But I have been working for the past 3 years with the High Atlas Foundation, and they are a US Moroccan a nonprofit organization started by former Peace Corps volunteers. And the mission is to help provide sustainable development projects in Morocco that often occur in rural areas. The rural areas are often populated by Amazigh people. And so I've had a lot of experience meeting and working with the populations that we have these projects with. So what you're going to see in this short film is a particular place where we have a particular type of project. Always, the projects begin with participatory development approach. And there is, I think, a tendency sometimes for large countries like the United States to seek to help people in underdeveloped countries by going in and helping provide something that is obviously needed, whether that's infrastructure, economic development, education, healthcare. But we believe at High Atlas Foundation that the best approach is to ask what people most desire and to help them come up with a plan for achieving their dreams and their objectives. So we always enter a community with an attitude of inclusion of all voices, gender, age, religion, ethnicity, whether you have land ownership or not, and so on, to find out what they want. And most often, it is education and jobs. And so what you're going to see here is a project that involves economic development in a rural area. And I will let the film speak for itself and be happy to answer your questions about it afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That was fantastic. So it is a short film, so we'll have time to talk about it afterwards. It's really fascinating. I was very lucky to go visit the site in February, so I can also chime in. The second film is very different. It's a little longer. It is a fiction. It's called So What If the Goats Die? It's by Sophia Alaoui, who's an up-and-coming filmmaker from Morocco. It's what came out in 2020. And it's been screened quite widely at international film festivals, including one in central France, the Clermont-Ferrand International Short Film Festival, the Sundance Film Festival. So it was also very exciting that it was part of production and development at the Sundance Film Festival. And I'm just looking at one more time. And it's also won multiple awards. And I think what's interesting, I'm teaching right now a class in the short story, and we've been talking about, what is special about a short story? And the students have kind of come up with this idea that a short story is something that it's a story that takes kind of an everyday event, something just in the course of your life, but somehow shines a light on it that ends up connecting it with kind of the mysterious qualities that we have in our lives, the kind of mysteries we have about existence, the questions we ask, the large questions like, why are we here? What's our purpose in life? And so as I looked at this film, I was like, wow, this is a genre, this is a short story, this is a short film. And yet it's from the perspective of someone who has a lot of knowledge about North Africa and about Amazigh culture. So I'm really curious what you all are going to think about it, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yalla. Do you know what that means, folks? It means let's go. It's like in Spanish,
It's like,
vámonos.
Vámonos.
Yalla, let's go. Let's get going.
Bonila. Ooh, echoing here. So, yeah, these are the two short films. We had a long film this morning. This is a very different combination of films. And I've seen this short a couple times, and it reminds me of this film of Sidney Poitier. I don't know if you know this film, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. Someone's nodding, yes. So, have you seen it? A long time ago. Well, it's an old film too. It's like from the late 50s or something. And I don't remember how it starts, but something's happened, and almost everyone has disappeared from New York City, except for these three characters. And there's this scene of Sidney Poitier, like I think walking across the Brooklyn Bridge or one of the bridges, and it's covered with cars, but there's nobody in the driving seats. It's just completely empty streets. And so it just reminds me a little bit of this, this villager who arrives in the town and nobody's there, and what's happened. So mystery.
It was nice for me to be able to watch the second film as just an audience member like everybody else, and I was, eager to see what was going to happen, and questions arose for me. Yeah.
I mean, it's a short, right? It kind of sets you up. You almost imagine you're going to see a whole feature, but it remains a short. And so I'm curious what people kind of draw from it. I'm curious if people have questions about it. But like I was saying, a short story often is, starting off with the everyday, something that, normal people, your ordinary life, but it's like a window opens and suddenly there's these existential questions. And at the end, I think the character says, what if everything we believe is not true? I mean, that's really the question of this film. What if everything we believe is not true? And what's interesting, I think, for me here is that you see so much here about the belief systems of traditional Amazigh villages and Amazigh people. I mean, you might have recognized a lot of these things, like relationships between men and women, okay? Relationships between the genders, relationship between the village and the city. Like, these are all real important elements of Amazigh life. And yet, there's this same question, what if?
Right, and in the short Seeds of Memory, you see the same thing about the belief systems of Moroccan Jewish people and Moroccan Muslim people and the cultural belief. And the thing that I found fascinating, because I know Abdurrahim, and he's such a nice man. He's such a nice man. But what you don't probably realize is that his father and his grandfather, they were caretakers of that cemetery before there was a tree nursery there. So they were just taking care of the cemetery for no compensation. And for people in America, that might be a little hard to understand. But it's part of just a general respect for the dead and respect for the families of the dead and the Moroccan Jewish people who have, as part of the diaspora, who have left, many of them to Israel in the 1950s, but not only there, but who do come back in the hundreds of thousands to visit those sites. I had never heard of Jewish saints before, because it's not part of American culture really, but they're Jewish people who have either lived there or passed through there and have done something in particular. So Raphael HaKohen had a dream that a local pasha was going to be robbed and killed by some people passing through, and he told that person who took measures then, and that's the story of that, and why he is revered and why there is a tomb there and the cemetery surrounding it. So Abdurrahim's father and grandfather just tended that cemetery in the absence of the Jewish people from that community who had left, just out of respect. And I think it really is very telling about Jewish-Muslim relations in Morocco and how they differ from the narrative that we see in the US about Jewish and Muslim relations in other places in the world. So talking about what if everything we believe to be true were not true, we have this narrative of Jewish and Muslim relations in the Middle East that maybe we don't find in other places like North Africa and like Morocco specifically.
Such a great point. I love that. You know, it's interesting, the two films too, because you know, there was a significant population of Jewish Moroccans at one point for a long centuries. If you go to Marrakesh, for instance, I was there and I ended up buying pillow cushions because the carpets are so gorgeous, but they're very expensive. So I looked for pillow cushions, and I found pillow cushions with a Star of David on them, and I found a tray with Star of David. So if you go in Spain as well, you find this combination of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian craft that goes back for centuries. And so, but there is a disappearance. There was a disappearance of the Jewish population who fled, thinking that they needed to flee in the 50s and 60s, and who went to Israel and to other places. And yet their presence is still there. And then it's funny, in this film as well, he goes into the village and there's a disappearance. Why have people disappeared? There's like a combination here. When I went, I was lucky to go to the tree nursery and cemetery in February, and I was really struck by the tomb, and you know, that it's a 700-year-old tomb. I just stood there. I was just like, and yet right next to it are all these really beautiful little seedlings that have just been planted. And so there's just a stretch of time there that is just fantastic. That's really...
Yeah, there really is a beautiful connection between economic and sustainable environmental development and recognition of cultural history, and using the combination of the two. As I said, with participatory development, you go in, you begin a conversation with people and you ask them what they want, but then, okay, so we want to plant trees. We want to transition from subsistence crops of barley and corn to more lucrative fruit trees. So we need land, right? And so fortunately, with the relationship with the remaining Moroccan Jewish community, which is fewer than 3,000 people in a country of, I think, 33 million people, right? So, you know, how do you have this relationship between these communities? And so they said, you can build these tree nurseries at this cemetery with land that is adjacent to this tomb and not being used. And so it's a beautiful, I think, intercultural connection where all things that flourish from it are all for the good. There's like, I can see, you know, no negative outcome, right? Because the women have an opportunity for financial independence. They have empowerment training. They have a 32-hour workshop, which you know, happens in every community. And from that, they build these cooperatives where they can earn money and improve the livelihoods of their own households. And all of this goes back to that cultural connection.
And, you know, another thing that comes up as we're talking about like intercultural, faith communication. And then there's also here gender, you know, there's also the relationship between Abderrahim and the women in the collective. And you might have noticed that, you know, there's also a respect in terms of not being in the vision of the camera, this kind of like not being on the camera. And then also in the film, what if the goats die of the woman that he encounters, you know, who's got the baby on the back. And his father has just said, oh, it might be marrying time for you. And he's like a little bit unsure about it. And then this event happens in the village and he arrives and there's this woman who's incredibly, you know, independent, right? She's like going for it. She's like taking off and like, do you want to come with me? And so it's interesting too, that I think that too, like how both films in some way show the relationship between gender and how maybe they're changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see in the second film that she says, there's nothing for me at the mosque. And I have found that while women are devout in rural and urban cultures in Morocco, they often don't worship at the mosque. And we have difficulty, we have a literacy program with the women, and if it's to be held in the mosque, because that might be the only place in the village that has a space big enough for the women to gather for that purpose, we may have a problem because there's no bathroom for the woman there. And we may have a problem educating the girls because there's no place for them to you know, use facilities and wash up in a village because it's just not geared that way. Not to say that now, in this modern time, that men in the family don't want the women to be educated, because they do. And in Morocco, there is the agency, it's, I'm going to tell you the English name, it's a French name, the Agency Against Illiteracy. And so they, you know, are very actively trying to raise the literacy rates for men and women, for urban and rural. But then you have these infrastructure problems that prevent that from happening. So when she said there's nothing for me at the mosque, I thought there's literally no space for her at the mosque.
That's why the collective is such an incredible thing. It's a place where they can gather. I was very lucky to be able to go there, and it was just, it's just a wonderful place. It's a place where they can be while their children are at school, and there's a big table out front, and we all sat around the big table, and there was a wonderful translator, and we spent about an hour just back and forth asking questions about each other. And I think one thing that came through with, especially the women with young children, is that they're super, super excited that their children are learning to read and write, and also learning to read and write in Tamazight. It's a really big change for them. So
that's since the 2011 new constitution in Morocco, that it's an official language and it's officially taught in school, or school is taught in that language that is the home language for people in rural areas, where before it would have been, school would have been taught in Arabic. And much like, if you know anything about the history of the United States, there were periods where Native Americans, children were taken away to school and their hair cut, and they were not allowed to use their own native language, their home language. So in the same way, it was a long time where school was not taught in that language, but now you see signage everywhere that has the Tifinagh script, and you see that it's being taught in school, so things are changing.
And film is part of that change. So I'm curious if anybody has any comments, or if they've noticed, I don't know, anything they want to say about the film. Is anybody?
May I pass the microphone to someone?
I was really struck by the economy, the radical economy in both of the films, in reaching out to touch something that was really very deeply human. Each film in its own way second film in Thai, it struck me that a question.
Could you speak into the micro? Thank you. Just speak into the
Yeah,
microphone so
okay.
we can all hear you.
It was a questioning of everything, really. You know, right from the beginning. It's saying not just what if the goats die, what if everybody dies? What if this whole society is going to be turned upside down? Who really is governing this society? The fact that it was done by a woman, it adds to the radicalness of it, I think, and I wonder what your reaction would be.
I think you're right. Yeah, like what, you know, it is. It's a big. It raises a big question. This film. I think you're right. In terms of it being a female filmmaker, there are a lot of really strong female filmmakers from this region, up and coming, that we've shown over the past 8 years, that have. They're just fearless. They are fearless. And I think it comes out of a long tradition of feminist activism on many levels. I mean, from Fatima Mernissi looking at the Quran from a feminist angle to, Zakia Salime, a feminist sociologist who's going to be talking on May 2nd about the struggle for women's ownership of communal lands or access to ownership in communal lands. There's a tradition of feminist vision and activism that I think we have just so much to learn from. So it seems natural that it's now visible in film, that we're going to just see that more and more. And, there's just such, I would love to share other films by female filmmakers from this region with you. They're just fantastic. And a lot of them are raising these huge existential questions, like how are we going to survive? How are we going to change so that we stop exploiting each other and exploiting the land? I think it's a good question.
Well, I was just going to say also that with the literacy program I mentioned, it is a family literacy, so we bring the children in for preschool education as well. And part of the reason for that is that while most of the women who participate, have had to talk to the men in their households, whether a father, a brother, or a husband, about permission to be able to leave the home for literacy lessons 3 times a week for 2 years. It's a big commitment. When the mother or the older sister brings, or grandmother, brings into the household the literacy activity with the child, it has the effect then of changing the culture of the village from the inside of the household, as the male figures within the household see the role of the women and the potential for their children's future, because really that is what everybody wants. It's a universal kind of desire, right? And so it's a strange thing about the Amazigh culture that it's a matriarchal kind of society with women running the household, and yet they need permission from the male person in their family, whatever the reasoning is for that, whether it's protection, right, or just reputation, or just male dominance. But in this instance, we're trying to portray women as keepers of knowledge and potential for economic and social opportunity, and a way to have the whole family and the whole community rise.
Could I just, hi, so thank you so much for introducing the High Atlas Foundation. Really exciting work. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about the current projects of the organization.
Sure. Well, the High Atlas Foundation has been around for 23 years. At this time, they have 15 fruit tree nurseries, and this is organic fruit trees and medicinal and aromatic plants. And they continue to convert land that is either community-owned, lent from the government agency like the Ministry of Water and Forests, or from the Jewish community. And that's like their primary activity, but it's sort of like a total package. When they go into a community, there's first the participatory meeting to come up with a design for, they make dream maps and those kinds of things to come up with a plan. And then they have empowerment workshops always for women, which the men of the village support. And they also bring in solar energy through solar pumps to, drill down a well, maybe even 200 meters in some places, to be able to pump water to the surface that's held in a basin, which you saw Abdurrahim actually getting water from to irrigate, and then for a drip irrigation system. They sell the trees to local farmers at a very nominal subsidized price so that the farmers can feel some dignity in that process. They track and monitor the trees for carbon offsets. So you can make extra money by selling carbon offset credits on the global market, by the carbon sequestered in the trees and the soil around the trees. And then with all of those things, they bring in experts to train the cooperative members in not only the technical agricultural skills, but also in business management. So the women in the literacy program are not only learning to read and write in Arabic to be able to do business, but also some numeracy to learn basic calculations. So all of that is going on. And in addition, we do things like clean water projects, and there had been a rash of forest fires, so there's reforestation projects. There's legal clinics with the universities in Fez and Marrakesh. So those are just some of the projects that are going on and have been continuing to go on with assistance from the US government, the EU, and so forth. Does that speak to what you wanted to know?
Yeah.
When I was there, I spoke with the person who heads the legal kind of aspect, and it's fascinating. They're dealing with all different kinds of issues. They're really, they're just a huge resource for people who don't have access to that kind of money to pay for a lawyer, and so they're just, it was really fascinating to hear everything from marriage law to just accidents to, just the whole range of things. But also they're doing oral history, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm sorry, I forgot completely to tell about this huge project they have. It's their Dakira Cultural Project, and it is to identify and preserve the culturally significant aspects all around Morocco. And significantly, it has to do with the Moroccan Jewish history and the preservation of places in the Medina, places like the tomb that you saw and the Jewish cemeteries, because as Lucy pointed out, we're talking about, people who were there for 1,000 years. I'm sure the students here, you've heard of the Spanish Inquisition, and you've heard of Columbus's travels in 1492, right? And how was Columbus's trip paid for? But with the exile of those Jewish people from Spain and the taking of their silver and gold before they left. And where did they go? Well, many of them went across the Strait of Gibraltar on the other side of the Mediterranean to North Africa and to Morocco. And so there used to be maybe 200,000 Moroccan Jewish people, and it's a vestige of that part of history, right? And so we have so much culture in Morocco that is part of that Sephardic immigration, forced immigration to Morocco. And so we have all these young people in Morocco, students at the university level, who don't know about that history because Jewish people have left in large numbers. So we're preserving that culture through this project supported by the US Agency for International Development to teach young Muslim people about their very, very rich history in Morocco.
So it's not a question really, just a comment on what you said, Ellen, about Amazigh societies very matriarchal. And I think we just need to be very careful, because when we watch the films, this morning's film and the two shorts, and actually we have examples, they may contradict this, because you talked about a freedom of movement. So that's an issue that you hardly see in real matrilineal or matriarchal societies, and such a thing really exists. We also saw in the film how women, at least one of them who decided not to show her face, is advocating for girls, for the schooling, for access to education, to languages, to jobs. And she was courageous in saying so, because often what happens in patriarchal societies is that patriarchy is sustained by the support of women too, who completely adhere to the values of patriarchal societies. So I think we really have to be careful with that, because there are many varieties of social structures within the Amazigh communities. And perhaps when we go further to the south, among the Tuareg, you will see other structures, perhaps closer to matrilineal systems, but it's not necessarily the case in the high Atlas Mountains in the film. But I think we saw also examples this morning in the film Argo of a woman who decided to go back to the village and to work on changing the mentalities, because she's aware of what's hindering freedom, progress, dreams, and so forth. And so although we saw women who lack many freedoms, but there is also agency. And we see some women who act as role models in their own ways. And we see the change coming from within. And this is why I think these films are really important for us to show, because change also has to come from within. It's really beautiful that the US and the European Union and other organizations are helping this project. I mean, this is very important, because I think once the local institutions see the implications of such projects, then they can support them. And I'm certainly not negating the importance of the international support. It is crucial, but I think when it's well done, then it can gain the local official support. And it is important, because without the local support, I don't think projects can be, can thrive.
I want to just respond to what you said. So just people who are new to this kind of film, like we said, there are films from the Canary Islands, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but are in the Atlantic, and then Morocco, which these films are from, but there's also Algeria. Like today, we showed a film from Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, as well as South Saharan. So this is a vast, vast area, and there are many different ethnicities who still are part of this larger kind of identity, which is always in construction, right? It's always in response to what's happening in each country. Each country has their own history, their own story. And so when you watch films, there's no one film can like tell you what is Amazigh. You can't. You have to look at many of them, just like, you know, in the United States. If we only looked at films from New York, you know, that would not tell you the whole story of the United States. So I hope that if you're able to come back to at 5:30, you'll see another film that will tell you something different about this amazing combination of cultures.
I was thinking along the lines of those connections between movies from different parts of North Africa and in relation to the movie we saw this morning from Algeria, and picking up on some common themes. And I thought that the interesting is to see that the planting of the seeds and the trees is kind of part of this maybe renewal of history, of historical memory. You know, in the same way that in the movie this morning there was this appeal to nature as also a forum of freedom and of progress, in a sense, away from traditional constraining forms of tradition. And then the second longer short movie had a similar kind of way in which the outside world was or this kind of extraterrestrial presence was threatening the established structures and belief systems in this very rural area. Just as in the movie this morning, there is this way in which this figure from within the community threatens the dominant male structure, patriarchal structure. So it's interesting to see that even though they probably don't or necessarily speak to each other, that there seems to be a common element that continuously ties them together. Maybe that speaks to deeper kind of, you know, a deeper awareness within traditional cultures that are at the same time finding ways to transcend whatever is constricting, restraining, closing them, and very often through women. And I think that's a really important element throughout, including, I would say, you know, the act of nurturing that the men can partake in, the planting, the growing, you know, things that one sees as traditionally as a feminine quality taken on by men, as in the first movie, Muhammad is a teacher, he's an educator. So there seems to be ways in which there are also cross sections that are suggested.
Yes, I think that's good that you pointed that out, because there are subtleties in the film from this morning and in some of the images that you saw in the short films that show you those inroads. And we were remarking after the first longer film in the morning about how, you know, there are these long periods of the film where you're just watching something happening in nature or nothing happening. You're just seeing like a photo of what seems like nothing, right? It's very quiet, and you have to patiently wait during that portion, but you can see this subtle portrayal of the relationship of the people and nature, right? And you saw that, I think, several times. And some of those subtleties you really have to be paying attention to see, right? And as far as within the rural communities and the relationships, gender-wise, I think the statistic is that, the family code, the mudawana in Morocco, I think women in the urban areas, something like 80-something% of them are aware of what the rights are for women. That family code spells out the rights of women in terms of marriage and divorce and land ownership and child custody and all of those things. But if statistically women in the rural areas, it's very low. It's like 15% are aware of it. So you have to watch for these little subtleties of the interactions between men and women to see how things are changing, but so slowly.
I think that's such a good point, too, about the slowness. A lot of the films you'll see, I don't know how to say it. It's like you get to be with the characters in nature. There's moments where you're just walking, and you can hear the character breathing, and you're just witnessing being in nature with these people. And it's so unusual. It's not something that we're used to at all. And I've come to really enjoy it. I just sit back and I enjoy it because it's like time is slowed down. And on a larger scale, if you look at indigenous film in general, this is something common in indigenous film across the world, is that through film, indigenous people are trying to represent their relationship with the earth and with their lands and the way they are persisting. That a lot of the whole strength here is this ability to persist. And in the land. It's really a very key thing. I think you're right about that. And just one last thing about the film. You can read it, of course, like short stories symbolically. Okay, so the aliens, I'm curious, anybody read the aliens as symbolizing something? Did anybody think, oh, they could symbolize something? I mean, what could threaten, a village in Morocco that's not alien but maybe human? What do you think could threaten people there? Anybody have any? Yeah? Yeah, do you want to tell us more?
Thank you, so that I didn't have to climb over. But yeah, I was gonna say, I saw the aliens. I didn't understand at first because I know, a lot of the times aliens represents like something more. Especially I like that comment that you were just saying just now, how there's when you're telling indigenous stories through film, there's always a kind of like a if you know Pan's Labyrinth, a fantasy kind of aspect of it that puts a face to what is happening to that community and the threat that it poses on that community. And so immediately when you said when you said alien, and when I was watching the film, I pieced it together, and I was like, oh, urbanization and threats that the trees that they're planting right now could be wiped away by big cities and industrial markets and stuff.
So cool, you got it, exactly. Yeah, that's great, yeah.
I also had a question. I don't know if we have enough time, but yeah. Okay, so while I was watching the film, I just had a question, and it was so it seems like as you were saying that the community itself in this rural area, in particular to Seeds of Memory, they are all in efforts of educating and advocating for illiteracy of the women and the men in that community. But yet I'm curious, are the women still at risk of prosecution from other cultures and other groups of people in Morocco trying to fight against illiteracy?
I'll try to answer that. Thank you for that question. And actually, there's great support for literacy in general and women's literacy in particular in Morocco. It's a stated goal of the king. And they have a constitutional monarchy, kind of like Britain does, right? They have a parliament that's partially elected, and they have ministers, like we have secretaries of different agencies, and it's a stated goal to have increased literacy of both males and females. And so, as with some predominantly Muslim countries in the world where girls don't go to school after a certain age, it's not that way. The beliefs are changing even in rural areas for people to get educated, but what does it take for somebody to become educated if you don't have the infrastructure of roads and those kinds of things? So the Agency Against Illiteracy actually provides the training for literacy teachers. We bring in young women who have some education to the university in the city, and they're trained to be literacy teachers along with university students who will be interns to assist them. And then the materials, the books, all of those things are provided. So it's part of the national government is in favor of it. And then within the communities themselves, it is something that's approved by the whole community. Everybody in the community wants it.
That's amazing to hear because, I know that a lot of times that's very rare, unfortunately, even in 2023 for that to be an advocate part of an everyday life in society. So thank you. Oh, and it was called Magical Realism. That's what it's called. Yeah, I just remembered the theme.
Thank you very much. What a great audience.